Now, Gaza's fragile ceasefire is holding by a thread after Israel carried out dozens of deadly strikes in the territory.
The guarantors of the ceasefire, and that includes US and Egypt, they are scrambling to de-escalate the situation. Hopes that a complete collapse could be avoided rose when both Hamas and Israeli military issued statements saying that they were committed to the agreement.
The U.S. President Donald Trump says the ceasefire is still in effect. He also suggested that Hamas leadership was not involved in any alleged breaches and instead blamed some rebels within.
We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas. And as you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that, some rebels within, but either way, it's going to be handled properly. It's going to be handled toughly, but properly.
Is the ceasefire still in place?
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is.
Israeli army says that it has resumed enforcing the ceasefire. The strike began after IDF accused Hamas of targeting its troops. In a separate statement, it said that 2 of its soldiers were killed in Rafah.
Hamas has denied the accusations of ceasefire violation, with one official accusing Israel of fabricating pretexts to resume the war. The Gaza Civil Defense Agency said at least 45 people had been killed in the Israeli strikes.
The Israeli Prime Minister stressed in a statement that Hamas has violated the ceasefire. The Israeli side also decided to close all crossings to the Gaza Strip and halt the delivery of humanitarian aid. Media reports say aid delivery will be renewed on Monday morning.
Now, the IDF said that the incident happened on Sunday morning, local time, when Hamas militants came out of a tunnel in the Rafah area and launched an anti-tank missile at an IDF vehicle. In response to the incident, the IDF conducted around 100 airstrikes against Hamas targets in the Rafah area and in the other parts of Gaza.
Nearly 10 hours after the fighting started, the IDF announced that it has renewed adherence to the ceasefire in accordance with the directive of the political leadership. Media reports citing officials from Israel and the US said that Israel notified the Trump administration in advance of the strikes through the US command center that oversees the ceasefire. Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner held a call with Israeli Minister Ron Dermer and other officials to coordinate and discuss the next steps. According to Axios, Washington urged Israel to respond proportionately but show restraint.
On the other hand, Hamas's armed wing insisted that the group was adhering to the ceasefire agreement with Israel and had no knowledge of any clashes in Rafah. However, one witness said that Hamas had been fighting a local Palestinian gang known as Abu Shabab, but the militants were surprised by the presence of army tanks.
Israel strikes hit Al-Burej camp in the central Gaza Strip. One of the strikes hit a house claimed to be used by journalists in Al-Zawaidah camp.
We were sitting here, safe and sound, and as you can see, the place is closed off to us. No one enters or leaves. We are all journalists. No strangers were entering or staying with us. Then the bombing happened right next to us, in the middle of the chalet. Our colleague, the broadcasting engineer, was martyred, and our colleague's child son was also martyred.
Now, the Israeli army, meanwhile, released another footage purportedly showing militants approaching its forces operating in Beit Lahiya in the northern Gaza Strip. They were struck after they crossed the yellow line, which marks the territory occupied by the Israeli forces. And well, to discuss more, we're now being joined by Dr. Avner Cohen. He is a professor of non-proliferation and terrorism studies at Middlebury Institute and a West Asia analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Now, this ceasefire seems to look very fragile at the moment. We know that there has been some kind of movement in Gaza itself. Hamas is, according to some reports, Hamas is fighting off some local groups there. Then IDF seem to have been taking precautions, but they were hit first, and there are a lot of claims that are going on. What is your first impression on that, and how fragile do you think the ceasefire can hold, and how long can it hold?
Well, it's interesting. I think there is a strategic interest of both sides because both are very much imposed by the United States to keep the ceasefire. However, I think the situation on the ground is very, very muddy. The line of demarcation, that yellow line, is not well marked, but even worse, there are still a lot of tunnels with Hamas personnel, combat personnel, who is under the Israeli part of that goes from side to side, and they don't actually distinguish over the, with this new artificial yellow lines. So the result is that Israel is trying to continue within its own sphere, that is about 50% of the territory, which is in Israeli control of the Strip. They're trying to take various kind of operation, including locking some of those tunnels. Some of those tunnels may have some Hamas personnel in it, so they're trying to save themselves. So the situation is in many places in the north, Bet Leah, Bet Hanun, but also Khan Yunis and Rafah, as happened today. It's very, very muddy on the tactical level. So it's very easy to get into because things are not well marked, and there are certain facilities and certain instrument of Hamas that goes on both sides without keeping the distinction between what's on the west and the east side of this imaginary yellow line.
Understood. Dr. Cohen, the blame is being put on a rebel faction operating within Gaza. How many such rebel factions exist in Gaza which are separate from Hamas, and do all of them hold the potential to throw the ceasefire off track?
That's a different issue. So there are a number of clans, that is to say, large families with some influence that over the last year or so were armed and were given certain kind of mission. It was their own, but with Israeli support against the Hamas. Some of them now are being left within the area, west of the yellow line, and they're fighting for their survival. They're fighting with the Hamas. Hamas killed some of them. Some of them have moved. So there is this internal clashes. So this is on the top of the fact that so much of it is not fully clear and not fully marked in terms of the yellow line. So there are tactical issue. There is the issue of the various groups. But there is, my understanding, about half a dozen of large families. They include tens, at the largest hundreds of members with some weapons, and they are clashing with the Hamas over influence in local communities. They're all talking about local combat.
That being said, do you think that the ceasefire, and we know that the living hostages are back, and it seemed to, of course, the Palestinian prisoners were also released, but do you think that this whole deal is somehow rushed, and a lot of these little things are being overlooked, such as these factions that are there, and how will that impact post-Gaza? Because we know that we're holding on to the ceasefire, but we do not know what role Hamas is going to play after this. Do you think that somehow is being overlooked? And we didn't see any kind of solution in the summit either after that Trump had held before.
Yeah, you definitely touch a very, very important point. I think the whole 20 or 21st points of the President Trump was rushed. It was his desire to end the things after the Doha operation. His patience came to an end. It was his first instinct to release the living. And now there are still about 15 or so, maybe tiny more, of still dead bodies within the area. And then, of course, there is a very difficult task to clarify and to set up some kind of instrument, hopefully what it was called in the agreement, International Stabilization Force, force that would be Arabs and others, to establish some kind of law and order and to replace the Hamas. The Hamas are not easily going to give up their weapons. even though apparently they are ready to give up the governance of the area. And that's going to be a very, very tough one. But we have not reached that point yet, because there is a difference between the phase one. We're still in phase one, and the clashes that we see now are still part of the phase one. They have not even gone. I think the visit of the vice president and Mr. Witkoff and Jared Kushner is to try to start the motion and the movement towards phase two, which is the governance system and how to start to rebuild and to disarm the Hamas.
Understood. Dr. Cohen, thanks so much for joining us here on World DNA. Everything seems fragile, volatile, fluid at this point on the ground. US pressure seems to be the only binding factor keeping that ceasefire, and of course the US president seems rather positive and wants to douse the fire before it grows any further. Let's just hope that continues this way, and phase two we see some kind of movement in that. That was Dr. Cohen joining us here on World DNA.
Thank you.